Okay, so forget the movie for just a second. We're going straight to the source. Jordan Belfort's own memoir. We're going to take an unfiltered, first-person tour through one of the most insane financial empires ever built, all told in his own words. And right off the bat, Belfort sets the stage for us with this. You see, this whole thing wasn't just about getting rich, it was about pushing every single boundary, moral, legal, you name it, as far as it could possibly go. This is the engine that drives the entire story. So where does it all start? Well, it begins out on Long Island, which feels like a whole other planet compared to Wall Street. This is where Belfort created Stratton Oakmont. And look, this wasn't just a company. It was its own self-contained universe with its own insane, adrenaline-fueled set of rules. I mean, this is how they basically weaponized being infamous. Think about it. Most companies would absolutely crumble if Forbes called them a twisted Robin Hood. But Stratton, they loved it. Belfort says they chanted, "Wear your merry band," and some guys even wore tights to the office. Bad press became their best recruiting tool. And that renegade attitude? It only got more intense once you were inside the firm. Things got, well, they got a lot wilder. We're talking about a place where, and this is a quote from Belfort, behavior of the normal sort was considered to be in bad taste. Yeah, and these weren't just one-off incidents. This stuff became ritual. A sales assistant was apparently paid $5,000 to have her head shaved right there in the boardroom. His partner, Danny Porish, literally swallowed a broker's live goldfish on a dare. It was just this modern-day Roman circus, fueled by pure greed and testosterone. And all of that depravity, it actually served a purpose. This quote, this is from Belfort's actual sales pitch for the Steve Madden IPO. It just reveals the whole philosophy, right? A sale wasn't just a transaction. It was a violent, all-out assault on the client's wallet. And you know what? It worked like a charm. Of course, you can't live at that level of intensity and just keep it in the office. It bled into every single corner of Belfort's life, especially with his drug use and his absolutely chaotic marriage to his second wife, Nadine, who he always called the Duchess. Now, Quaaludes were Belfort's drug of choice, and he describes the whole experience in these 4 darkly comedic stages. It starts with a tingle, then you start slurring your words, then you're drooling, and finally, a complete blackout. This wasn't just some side story. This cycle was a constant, driving force in his day-to-day life. And their marriage was basically a battlefield. So after he talks about another woman in his sleep, Belfort sees it as, no big deal, just a minor slip-up. Nadine's response is, well, it's a little less forgiving. Their entire relationship was just this cycle of him messing up, him coming up with some absurd excuse, and her just exploding. All this excess at the firm and at home had to be funded by bigger and bigger crimes. Pretty soon, just manipulating stocks wasn't going to cut it. Belfort needed to make his money disappear, and that journey led him to the super secretive world of Swiss banking. And the key to this whole thing was something called the Bear Corporation. You can think of it as basically a ghost company. There are no names on any documents. Whoever is physically holding the stock certificate is the owner. It's the ultimate tool for making millions of dollars completely untraceable. So how did the playbook work? Well, it was a surprisingly straightforward, multi-step process. First, he used his wife's European family as mules to literally strap cash to their bodies and smuggle it out. Then, a friendly Swiss banker would move that money into those ghost corporations. And finally, a specialist, a master forger, would create fake documents to bring all that cash back home. For a while, he must have felt completely untouchable. I mean, you can see why from this quote. His Swiss banker basically looked at American regulators with total contempt and promised him zero cooperation. It was a criminal's paradise, a fortress of secrecy. But a life lived at that speed, at that intensity, it can only end one way, in a spectacular crash. And for Belfort, the end came with a force that pretty much matched the insanity of his rise. The beginning of the end came with this new, absolutely horrifying phase of a Quaalude high. He describes his brain being perfectly sharp, totally aware, but his body was completely unresponsive. He had zero motor control, while his mind was just wide awake and panicking. Moments later, he crashes his Mercedes. And when the police test him, they find this many different drug categories in his system. 7. And look at this list. This isn't a party. It's a full-blown pharmacy on legs. The sheer scale of his addiction is just laid bare right here. It wasn't a habit. It was a full-time job just to manage this chemical cocktail he was pouring into his body. So despite everything, the crashes, the investigations, all of it, Belfort refused to cooperate. So what finally broke him? What was the thing that made him flip? It wasn't the threat of 30 years in prison. It was the feds threatening to charge his wife, Nadine. That was the one line he just wouldn't let them cross. And once Belfort started talking, the dominoes just fell fast. His partner, Danny Porish, got 20 months. The famous Steve Madden, who had acted as a rat hole for illegal stock, he got over 3 years. And his accountant, who decided to fight the charges, was sentenced to a full decade behind bars. But even after cooperating, Belfort was still really conflicted. He actually ends his story with this very question, wondering about the morality of the deal he made. I mean, he was the whale, right? He was the biggest target of all. So did turning in dozens of guppies really add up to justice? He kind of just leaves that for us to decide. And that brings us to the final, and maybe the most important question of all. Late in the book, a friend asks him this, just a simple question. And it's really the perfect way to end this, because after hearing this entire story from his perspective, we're left wondering the exact same thing. Can we trust this narrator? Can we trust this story? What do you think?